but linked to academia. This is the closest we get at TNO. That's so the work that and it goes really slow. So the work that you will see is evolution of something like 25 years of trying to do advance the same topic with periods in which we have a lot of time to dedicate on it, and others which basically are in the desert with no funding and no time to do it. So it goes in waves where we can actually advance this. And this is actually, this time is one of the best times that we have had over the last 2 decades, where we have plenty of interest and plenty of people working on it. So the advances it is noticeable now, recently in the last 3 years. So that we dare to prepare, let's say, propose something new. I think that it can make a contribution to the field of science, technology, and policy research. And this is about looking into, let's say, the human and behavioral dimensions that would perhaps help us understand better the dynamics of innovation and ecosystems. And so I presented this piece of research in the OSP conferences, and I got encouraged to continue, that it seems to be bringing something new. So that's why I'd like to come and present it here and basically expose this success to the knife of all of you. So be kind, but be aggressive, I'd say in the comments. So thank you. What I will go through is basically what are the major questions that we're trying to address in this stage of the development of this approach, and the model itself, the approach that we took to respond to the questions, and then try to place this approach in the major trends in science and technology policy, but also, and more importantly, in public policy. And then link it a little bit to the multi-level perspective. I will not dwell too much on the last point, because I think most of our time will be in the first 3 parts. So according to matters immediately, this is basically what you see here is let's say 3 questions that we got in a project that started about 2.5 years ago, where the questions were how this does the engagement in sustainable behaviors emerges. Yeah, and how not only how this emerges at the individual level, but there was interest to see how it emerges if it emerges at the local, at the national, regional, or supranational level. So it has the influence of, let's say, European funding. European, let's say, policymakers want to know what can we do at the European level. Then, of course, we have the interest on if the interactions affect outcomes and the emergence of, let's say, behavioral patterns, and if there are really systemic barriers and drivers that moderate such engagement. And once, let's say, assuming that we can detect those and let's say typify those interactions to see if there are any common conditions that would help, let's say, large aggregates of people converge to common goal, common policy goals, which is a big challenge. So let's say a very stylized model that we will see in detail later is that we have, let's say, in innovation research early on, we knew from the works of Nelson and Winter, that knowledge and interaction organize, let's say, innovation dynamics. And we know quite a lot about knowledge, Spotify, tacit, how it's transferred, how it's stored, how it's transmitted. So, but we know less about the interactions. Although this idea that, let's say, actors interact is very profuse in the literature, innovation and science technology research, we rarely go in detail as to how this might happen. And so we took the challenge to look into it. And so what we know now is that we can typify really well what happens on one side, what drives individuals, from this behavioral science perspective. We know far less about what drives let's say, policymakers. There are a few studies that look into policymaking dynamics and what are the constraints and drivers of policymakers themselves. And we know quite a lot about also in the private sphere, how business engage or not, and their performance once they engage in innovation. And also a big gap is how they align, yeah, and how they converge. And only this part, the stage one. Oops. And this is the stage at which we, let's say, systematize the collection of data and basically gather the inputs to do the work and in the analytical work in the other two levels. And basically what the model says is that most behaviors can be explained in terms of few factors. One is relates to the let's say the potential outcomes that the actor, given actor sees at the moment when he's planning to do to take the action and consider the potential outcomes. The other is the internal moral norm that relates to values. Yeah. And one more is how we perceive, let's say, the dominant social norm that then comes from friends, family, standards, institutions, any norm that we consider when deciding or not to take an action. And the third is the actual capacity to conduct the behavior or the action that we have in mind. And basically these factors moderate and determine an intention, a plan, and at the end, the behavior itself. Yeah. Now it looks very simple, but it's unbelievable, but this is a cognitive part, this is a normative part, and this is an instrumental part, capabilities that pervades, and where they say all of them in social sciences, but also especially in social psychology, they were for 40 years fighting with each other. So, no, it's norms, no, it's cognitions, no, it's actual agency. All of them trying to predict behavior. It was in 1991 when Eisen and Friesen got the first, let's say, definitive empirical evidence that actually all of them are. And they proposed this model. It's very successful, but again, now people are trying to do more with it, but it's not capable of describing dynamics. Yeah. So, and this is what we try to do. So we cover now the first part. And now we go into the second one, where basically what we do is take this concept of system or small groups, where we have a common goal, yeah, and we have different actors, yeah, contributing or say acting against the common goal, depending on their own, let's say, predispositions based. Such thing that behind each of these bubble is this model that we saw in stage one. So it's not here because it gets really complicated. So, but the point here is that all of them influence each other. Yeah. So what we see is that, for example, here, this is the sphere of interaction. Yeah, but whatever we do here, it fits back to affect the potential outcomes of the interaction, the norms that are in place, and also the agency to act. In case of policymakers, in this case, people or companies, but it can get more complex. We have worked with this model qualitatively, also quantitatively, to check relationships and interactions, and let's say sources of asymmetry and asymmetries and predispositions. But something that we have not done in depth yet was what is the modality of the interaction? What is the ruling? Let's say, what are the rules that moderate, and let's say, the disposition to converge or diverge to common actions or to shift from certain behavioral patterns. And this is what we basically do in this part. We integrate this bit in the second stage, and what we try to do here is the next let's say, the most advanced part, and which is resulting now the most challenging, because we need to integrate the first and second and the third one. We will try to explain here. And basically, and it just happened to be coincidence. We were looking for years for a model that would tell us about how people relate. And we look into different theories, yeah, but none of them were really satisfying, and not let's say the constructs, the elements of the theory were not mature enough to be operable at the mathematical level, and less even at the quantitative level. And it just happened to be the case that by the same time when Eisen publishes his paper, third-kind behavior, also Fiske published a book on the structure of the social relations. And it's fantastic because this anthropologist basically said that there are 4 basic models that organize human interaction. One is community sharing, another is authority ranking, another is quality matching, and market pricing. It looks very simple, but the underlying definitions of each of them are very complex. It roots into values, preferences, traditions, agency, assets, all kinds of them. And you can look into the theory itself. But let's say it gives enough elements and gets really complicated when you see the potential combinations between these 4 models in different contexts and in different times. And the model, I mean, for many years was unnoticed, and over the last decade has become quite well known, let's say. And you will be surprised, but it's being used now also in engineering. Yeah, and Boolean algebra has become a partner, let's say, in methodologies on how to implement this model in robotics and artificial intelligence. So it's being now used not only, let's say, in organizations to design, let's say, social incentives based on relational models to basically define better contracts and relational models within organizations, but also in designing how cooperative robots, yeah, and how agents interact in cyberspace systems. So it has to be taken serious because it has an engineering also application, and that's what we're trying to do here. And we expect that we will profit also from the, let's say, the advances in artificial intelligence that people are using robotics to use it in the social sphere. And basically, if you look again in the previous model that we have, these are small cells, yeah, of an ecosystem, yeah, where you have actors, yeah, and within this ecosystem, we have an internal dynamic that, let's say, where we will have a dominant model that organizes the relationships. In this case, I put community sharing, where what is mine is yours, and we don't check what you do, what I do, but just we see the outcome of our interaction for the common good. But then we will have other, yeah, and this basically these rules the interactions within this small cell, let's say. But then we will have other cells that where the dominant model is equality matching or authority ranking or market pricing. Yeah. And then what we would see, what we will see often is that the relationship between ecosystems or between organizations, yeah, in itself are systems. So it could be, I mean, the dominant or the required model to relate to the market pricing. If we are following regulations, could be authority ranking, yeah, depending with the institution that we are relating with. So that really the model, I mean, starting from the individual to the cell to the social upscale, it becomes really complicated and certainly complex. So this is the latest stage where we are working now in the model. The other 2 stages are more well structured and very validated. But this part where we intend to profit from what's being done in engineering is the, let's say, the less well developed to formalize and to test it empirically. So this is the stage where we are now. And at the end, we have the model. We said that there are individual, let's say, characterizations and explanation of what drives individual behavior. the ecosystem part, and then the upscaling at the social level. What we see obviously here is that the level of complexity increases. And what we would like to do, we are not at that stage yet, is to see the influences from one side, I mean, from the individual, the upscaling at the social level, and the other way around, how the influences cross each other. And what we have now experiences working at the individual level and linking it, let's say, looking just as one target population, linking it to the studies of impact assessment, yeah, but also creating innovation indexes at the sectoral level. Those are experiences that exist already. Also checking, I mean, this part is being used to do analysis and diffusion of technologies and the impacts, and also in sectoral performance. This is at the stage where we are with this model. And what we want to do and continue doing in the future is basically apply it at different stages of the policy cycle, and agenda setting, policy formulation, and decision making, and implementation and evaluation. We have, let's say, patching work at different stages, yeah, but there is not yet single project where we have done everything. And what I want to highlight here is that working with this model and applying it from the individual to the upscale collective is not a task for a single researcher. I mean, we are working with teams of researchers. In one project, we have up to 42 people working in different cases and advancing in different stages of the So this is basically larger scale research, big science. And so where do we place this? If you, all of you know the literature, we were advancing from, let's say, we learned from all of them. Yeah, we learned from national systems of innovation, I mean, very 80s. We learned some things from there. Also, from the last 2 decades, it's been dominated by, at least the last decade, by these innovation system failure, especially the work from our colleagues from Sweden and the Netherlands, and let's say functions, the roles and functions in the system. But then what we see now is that there are new demands and new approaches emerging, and I think our work fits in this part, where we are looking and trying to understand the interactions, contestation, if nudging works or not. Yeah, vision-oriented ecosystem. Now this idea of transformative innovation, and we see, let's say, more and more the insistence that we need to basically include stakeholders in the policy making and the policy analysis, more participation. And what we see basically from this idea of innovation system, with everything, this innovation is oriented to support competitiveness, growth, employment creation. All of those goals still are there, but now we're supposed to give directionality to solve the great challenges and solve, let's say, human problems. This is where traditional innovation policy, we have seen, it doesn't give enough, let's say, elements to tackle this. This is where the work that we're trying to do now contributes towards. Now, where we place this, here it's important to notice that we are not alone. I mean, perhaps we are one of the few people working in the behavioral sciences at this in this form in the innovation and science and technology policy research community. But out there is a really growing fast community, especially within ministries, within the government itself, that is taking almost a breathless pace of growth. And last year in the Netherlands, for example, the Behavioral Innovation Network had a conference where more than 800 people participated in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is this big, really small. So it's really growing. In 2000, I think in 2014, there were just a handful of institutions that declared that they were using behavioral sciences to do policy analysis and policy design. What is dominant here is this idea of nudges, which it has also its own, let's say, shortcomings. So we are trying, with our approach is trying to develop better models. What we see now is that you see the changes, more than 200 institutions reported, the government ministries reported to have been using now what is called behavioral insights, policy analysis and design. So it's going really, really fast. The countries that are, let's say, more savvy in using it is the US, the UK, and the Netherlands. These are the, let's say, the biggest communities, but they are everywhere. So the pace and the interest on these approaches is growing really fast. And I think our field, ourselves, we have to catch up, or at least learn from what we can make. So this is the last slide. What I would like you to see is where we fit this. So we have policy strategy, attention policy for, using behavioral analysis, and we can address implementation and impact assessment, but also design, and implementation in the three stages. So we look at, again, in the individual behavior, looking at the structures, and patterns. We can look at the community and collective level, the level of action, and then looking at the state, country, and societal trends. And this brings the issue of, related to the GDPR, how much invasive is this to the citizen's rights? How much policymakers or researchers are allowed ethically to do research in this area? So because, let's say, if we have a model that, let's say, and it works to describe dynamics, we can validate empirically and predict actual behavior or close to prediction, then we have an issue here as to who uses this type of tools. And I will leave the discussion open, questions and criticisms. Thank you.
Decided by the same question. First thing is that when you're talking about the literature, I said you don't talk science. All develops frameworks, and there's been a lot of research. For example, the multiple streams framework. I just think it would be very interesting because the thing that is a bit dramatic about this model is that seem to put all actors in the same level. I know you talk about ranking, but in policy making, that's not really the issue. I mean, the issue is not that all actors are in the same level and how they're processing information. Is actually the huge power symmetries. So, just as an example, right now in the United States, the president has a package for environmental action being blocked by one senator, who happens to be the biggest recipient of oil and gas funds. The whole Senate, even though he's a Democrat. So it's not about processing of information. It's not about, it's really about a small number of organizations using their huge power to block or to influence collective decisions. I'm just wondering, how does this fit into this model?
Okay, we have looked in, let's say, first, we have not looked all the let's say, the literature and political science, but we have looked into, let's say, prominent authors, and sociology that dominate the, let's say, the landscape of, let's say, political analysis. And why we went with Fiske is when we make analysis of the main constructs, across different schools, there were commonalities, that basically were the same. The underlying, let's say, concept was the same. And Fiske, what it has is that he has basically created an algebra of those definitions. That's why we follow Fiske, because it repeats, yeah, the same constructs that others have used in political science. But what the big advantage is that he has systematized a framework that we could use then mathematically and numerically, which is more difficult in other theories of, let's say, political science, sociology. That's why. Now, what you said is, yeah, let's say we don't put, let's say, this is the framework, but there is an empirical part and methodological part where we don't put everybody in the same basket, and we are very, very well aware of the differences in powers. And I want to go back here. What we can check with the, let's say, there are also a couple of empirical studies about this, where we check basically what are the determinants in one side, but also the power capacities and the asymmetries, yeah, and how one, let's say, actor, one single individual even can have power to block or to push forward. So it's considered, but it is more really in the nitty-gritty how you implement the model. Well, I think what we can differentiate this approach so far up to this point is because we have very well defined protocols on how to replicate, how to define the behaviors per actor, yeah, per context, per time, and across the ecosystem, so that we can differentiate very clearly what are the just the behavioral definition, what are the stakes of different actors already and their positions. Yeah. For example, in a project that we are implementing now, we are looking at the connected and cooperative autonomous mobility. And let's say the policy goal at the top is to have 0 accidents, 0 deaths, and let's say zero CO2 emissions. That's the policy goal. But actually, when you see into the behaviors of different actors, they are very different. They contribute perhaps to the goal, but actually consumers, that suppose some of them are, let's say, environmentally conscious, yeah, but actually they want convenience, yeah, they want good price, yeah, and let's say convenient transport. Then you have policymakers that indeed they want to basically differentiate themselves by, let's say, internally within their ministries, yeah, get legitimacy to do things, but also they are looking into policy cycles. Yeah, and they are looking on the entity actually what they basically covering their office and their ministry, which is some kind of a split incentives. Now you have the behavior that is displayed, but actually the real behavior that they have. And then you have the let's say the producers of cars, that they indeed what they sell is sustainability, safe cars, CO2 emissions, yeah. But actually what they want is shareholder value, yeah, with the split incentives also. But those things we can describe, yeah, and when possible we get data, see power asymmetries, but also differences in perceived outcomes and differences in perceived norms. All of that we can check. But I must say there are problems also challenges to get the data, because we are talking with the strategic behavior when you're looking into these things. So it's difficult sometimes to get the data. Good.
Well, for many things, we'll cover through it. Very complete, very intensive. And my question is a bit it's reflection on the structure of the model. I was wondering whether this relational and behavioral dimensions of the organization can be part of related with regards to particular context. And you were mentioning the policy types of community, and then the setting, implementation, execution, relation types, something. Would it make sense to articulate that relational models and behavioral dimensions for each specific stage of this process? Which could do, which to me, they not require very different actors, very different behaviors, very different relations. So I was wondering whether that could be articulated partly in this aspects.
Well, let's say this is one of the one of the strengths and weaknesses of, if you could call it weakness, of let's say behavioral approaches. That first, I mean, what is needed for it to work is that you have to define really clearly what is the behavior, the context also, and the time what is happening, so that you can define for each actor, remember their roles within an ecosystem, what is their supposed behavior related to a general, let's say, societal goal or policy goal. So the strength is that you can typify very well per case and context of application, yeah. But then you lose the cycle. Yeah, you focus on agenda setting or decision making or implementation. Yeah, but then if you can include all of them, then you have to design a different instrument. Yeah, to consider in which stage the actors are participating. So you can generate some kind of behavioral criterion based on generality and specificity that cover both. But then you lose something. Either you become general or more specific. You see? So this response. Jordi's been quiet. I think he has a big knife there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please, yes.
Thank you, Carlos, for presenting this model, which I think has great potential to better understand this paradox between agency and structure and innovation, or questions on innovation. And on the one hand, it's very clear the idea behind the model, but on the other hand, I'm also still struggling to see what the abstract model would mean in practice. So I was wondering, do you have any examples from more empirical work that would help to illustrate certain things? I can imagine that you don't have an example that would fully illustrate the model, but can you elaborate?
Yes, I mean, and then let's say if we go to the yeah. There, yeah. Let's say there is a lot of work here, yeah, and there are applications and technology diffusion analysis, yeah, in clean technologies, but also in adopting healthy living styles. Or, as I said, I mean, there are a lot of empirical styles that can be replicated. When you go here, I think there are a couple of, at least ourselves, we have done 2 or 3 studies. It has also worked in this field. Also, there are, let's say, examples how to go up to here. And then when you come here, there are, let's say, there are no studies yet the way we are doing it, but there are other applications in other fields, especially at the level of the firm, where people are trying to basically implement relational models into understanding the organizations of the behavioral, let's say, behavioral aspects on how to create incentives for the governance within organizations. So there are examples. Indeed, ourselves, we have produced protocols to implement and replicate this model. So there are examples, basically.
Regarding the links.
Yeah. Indeed, I mean, I think I will send to Jordi a link to a project where we are doing exactly this now. And I think most of the deliverables will become eventually public. The big knife is coming now.
No, but no, I'm very glad that you will be coming back. Well, the question of the issue with this is how we implement it. And I know Tom has really gone quite a bit to implementing aspects of it, and it's the learning opportunity for us. And really, the proof of this case is in the beginning, and happy that what we got already. So it's good that we can use. Okay. And I think also it's, so I'm not taking any knife. In fact, we were commenting this just before the meeting that I like very much is going to the theory to support what it is in innovation policy and perspective is something that is rarely done. So this is it's good and we are all about to learn from it. One of the issues, small knife, that just occurred to me right now, discussing kind of implementation for the doing is what is this analysis for? And in what context you use this framework? I can see that you can use it in a kind of almost academic analysis of how change has occurred or not occurred in a specific sample. So that would be in a way evaluative, but in itself, it's not an evaluation of policy, it's evaluative work. And I can see this, it has really quite been useful. Now, for evaluation, just occurred to me that if there might be a problem if you apply this kind of rationale in an evaluation approach, which is that to do this, you need to take a step back from the subject of analysis. You have to present yourself as an evaluator from the outside, which doing the analysis almost in an engineering way of what is happening in order there to intervene in it and change it. So if you look at it from this perspective, this evaluation approach, in fact, in your own work, assumes a relational model theory, assumes that what the public policy is doing is working on an authoritative approach.
And has the capacity,
Huh?
and has the capacity to
And
influence,
has the capacity to implement,
which is not the case sometimes.
which okay, so a lot of the stuff we are doing now in teaching transformative innovation, in fact, the assumption is that we are working towards strengthening what you would call the community sharing aspect of policy. And that means a different approach to evaluation, which I would say cannot be this. Because this, you take a step back and then you add into the system, like it's on the outside, where the community sharing is more of all happy, all dancing, all working together, actually research. Which in fact what we are trying to do in our evaluation approach. I don't know whether this is a problem. This is a reflection. I think that I don't know how to think. I think there's an issue when evaluation, if you take this evaluation approach, that you are really assume a sort of power relation, some power structure, which is in fact the same power structure that you have to undermine if you want to do the thing.
Yeah. No, it's no, thank you for the comment, and I think it's very valuable. As I mentioned earlier, we have done let's say a project where we were requested to develop a methodology for impact assessment, and we use say the first the stage one of the model, let's say, and let's say, but what we did there is basically look from the, if you look at the model from the we took this, if you look at the evaluation model, the logic model, we took this as the input, this bit as the process, there is an evaluative process, where the activities are taking place, and then a part of the performance, where you have, let's say, the activities that they're actually done. And what we did is where you have here the activities that when people, let's say, invested in this case where artificial intelligence applications for public services. And then we have the outcomes. We added, let's say, the impacts aggregated, let's say, with the aggregation of all the outputs perceived. And so what we could do is relate, let's say, from the perceptions, especially which is done very often in impact assessment, you go to consume what you saw, then what were the impacts, what drive it, or what were the impediments, whatever. So These were general the impacts, and then we could link step by step, from drivers to activities and to impacts. And what we did is basically send a questionnaire to procurement officers to respond whatever information they have in these stages, and then being able to basically link the inputs from this side to the impacts. With a success of, let's say, explaining a large portion of the variance and reported impacts. The real impacts, we don't know because all of this is analytical. But then we could guide back and basically by regression analysis, allocate which factors and the impacts were the most important. And the inputs were the most important, explaining the impacts, so that we could trace back. That would be, I would say, road mapping back, track back the sources of the impacts. That would be supposed to say, be the leverages of the policy intervention. And this is how this would work. Now, what is this is still closely linked to what is being done before. What was different there is that with these three components, we could generate something that we call a general, an innovation propensity of the system. With all the procurement officers disclose what were the drivers and barriers, so that we can calculate a propensity of, if we could call the sample. And depending on that propensity, we could relate it to an output-input analysis where we relate the propensity in the sample to actual effects and aggregated demand. So it basically is some kind of estimating a propensity to save or a propensity to invest, like is done in economics in relation to aggregated. So this is the way how we have used this, and the process to do it, as I mentioned earlier, is all of it described in the report, step by step how to do it. But again, the question, informative evaluation, is different, because basically this is analytical tool. It's not participatory. You go there to improve and analyze it.
Explanation. Because what you described is an analysis of the system. Policy system analysis. But it is not strictly speaking policy evaluation. And if the policy evaluation is to be formative, then it's a step further. Separated from.
It's a different.
From the point of view of what it's more useful to support transformation, probably we don't have much. Because there's very different approaches. I have to think whether I agree with that based on different assumptions about how transformation occurs, probably so how it's sort of just standard. And the question of whether this kind of approach systematically applied in policy environments can be more supportive of transformation, or the one we're doing, that makes you feel informative with condition. So they're very different. And there are claims in both sides. Increasingly, there are claims that each one is probably better and proposition is changed. So it's good for them.
It's just the last. So I also wanted to ask you what you see. For the context of application, while I was presenting this paper at the US3, there was one of the reviewers was actually a policymaker in the Netherlands. And so the first comment that he made is Carlos, I like this approach, and my ministry, I think we would like to use it. The problem we have, that was the second comment, is that we are getting normative recommendations from let's say transitions and transformative innovation policy that we cannot use. And basically, it's not that they could not use them, but that they could not implement them.
Yeah, because they're part of the trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm getting recommendations basically that we are running against administrative protocols that contradict the whole approach. And this is precisely what you were saying about power. Yeah, and so this idea of formative, including and creating the agenda, obviously is needed. Please.
Thank you for the presentation and for the nice discussion so far. Along the lines of the meso level where problem I think it's worthwhile contemplating also what is our conceptualization of the real world, not only the policy process, but also, for example, the scientific process of knowledge production, which currently is undergoing change, and the extent to which your model is able to accommodate that change. So the open science, that process is being broken over, not only in terms of open access and open data and access to results, but actually the open engagement with society in the production center. So that's, one thing. On the other hand, I love the way that the model helps us to somehow create order in a very complex world. It's built up from the individual to the society level. Plenty of people have commented on the complexity, not only conceptually, but also methodologically. You've mentioned yourself, we actually need some data. It's a pretty data-hungry model, right? And we find ourselves as researchers in the world where we have to work in GDPR-compliant ways, which are enormously restrictive. On the other hand, I think we also realize there is plenty of data around. Certain big high-tech players have so much data at their fingertips about behavior from the individual to the collective level. Where is the interface here? Where is the intersection? How can we create collaboration with those industries and move away from them just knowing too much about all of us individually and collectively, and actually helping to take science through?
Yeah, it's a very challenging question. Yeah, at first, it's difficult first to know what data is out there. And you need to know per context, per case, if there's data available, because what normally happens is there's a lot of data, but not the data that you need for certain things. Yeah. But saying this, as the general categories, especially in this, let's say the workforce that builds and demands data for the other levels, we have seen that the general categories that define this, let's say this constructs, let's call it, or variables, but also the actual activities, you could actually classify data according to these categories. And we have done this exercise, for example, with the European the Community Innovation Survey, where we basically redefine existing data according to this model, and we could basically run a factual analysis to see whether the data that we have in the Community Innovation Survey clusters around the same constructs that we had in this model, and it did. And it did with a level of confidence about 75%. And the sample training the variance. So three factors, these three, let's say cognitive part, normative part, and capacities explain it basically a large proportion of what is the innovation survey about. So that we can then really use, at that time, there were 169,000 observations for 1 year across several years. So this kind of exercise, I don't know if it can be replicated in other data sets, but since, let's say, this model reflects human behavior, I would assume that we can classify when let's say, we see data and check if the data, let's say, match the underlying meaning of each of these functions. So at least the method to do it is already described in a couple of reports. So if the heuristic works to use it for different data sets across different concepts of application, that's another question. But at least the intent to use it on existing data, there is an example of this.
We have also a question from our live participant. David Barrera asked if you can tell us more about the landscape project that you mentioned that involved services.
Yeah. Yes. This is called Green Energy Transition Actions. It's called GRETA. I think that's why we won the project. Because of the name. It just happened to be 3 years ago when we submitted it. But basically, it's the framework that we are using is basically this one. Yeah, and from there we then are using at least down to here. Yeah, this is really well systematized, and we are working now in the third part. But you can access, let's say, deliverables. It's greta.eu, I think. I don't know. I have to check that, but probably I'm crossing with public domain that somebody else has. But yes, we have, let's say, in that project, we have, let's say, we have generated a framework which is very similar to this one, but applied to the energy transition. There is also work in energy poverty and how it relates to basically the adoption of whatever new technologies are related to energy. The empirical part, which is basically gathering data to apply this model. Then we have a simulation exercise to try to link it to existing expert systems and energy efficiency, and also a simulation with the different parts of the model that you saw here. And then once we are ready with we could call the diagnostic using this model, then we throw the hot potato to our colleagues from Bologna, which are sociologists, that they try to develop which is called a new, let's say, community social contract, considering how the ecosystem works. Yeah? And it's basically what we learn from the model, then we try to apply it and see if the leverages that we identify in the analytical part can steer anything in the creation of community contracts. And then we have another aspect where we then try to learn policy implications for it at the European level, at the regional level, and also at the local level. That's, let's say, this is the upper parts of the last work in the project, in the policy analysis. And so that's the scope of work. We have the University of Bologna, Fraunhofer, Lund University, Technalia. GIS is an institute for research in Germany. Also, a small an SME that is trading with energy online. It's called CleanWatch. I think there are two partners now that I cannot recall now. But then all of them together, we are about 40. And if you just clean, well, obviously go with the times countries, probably you will find 1,000, more than 1,000 hits, but I can send you the link to the project. Actually, there are other 4 projects that are looking at the same question. And there is a community around, I would say, around more than 100 researchers looking into energy citizenship, which is the topic of the project. I can send you the links also. Good.
I think we can then wrap up here the seminar. Thank you very much, Carol, for the presentation. You all for the very interesting discussion. Hope to see you again here. Thank you anyone for opportunities to discuss about this spring and its application.
Thank you.